right. Welcome, everyone. I call the December 16, 2020 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purpose of tonight's meeting is to hold study sessions on housing code amendments continued from November 4th and the 2021 preliminary planning docket. Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. Under Governor Inslee's proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings, this meeting will be held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The mentioned Bothell notice, city websites, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. Video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone and listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they're referencing so everyone can follow along. For those who provided advance notice are able to make comments under the audience comments section of the meeting. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. At this point, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners, and I'll just roll through my name, position number. Commissioner Olson.
Present.
Commissioner Peastrup.
Present.
Commissioner Curd.
Present.
Commissioner Alderks.
Present.
And Commissioner Gustafson.
Present.
Also in attendance are Department Director Michael Katterman, Senior Planner Dave Boyd, and I forgot to write the names of the other staff.
Planner Kirsten Mant.
Okay, and
Public Works, Utilities and Development Services Manager Boyd Benson.
all right, thank you. So for the commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question to try to get my attention. When we're in ribbon mode, sometimes it's difficult to see folks on the end, so I'll scroll back and forth and try to catch you. If you wish to speak, do indicate it by getting my attention. I'll call on you as I see you. It'll help avoid the problem of two people speaking at once. Let's mute when we're not speaking so that we can avoid as much interference as we can. So the first item on the agenda is public comment. In keeping with Governor Inslee's emergency proclamation 20-28 regarding public meetings and open public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. Director Cotterman, please let us know if any comments were received.
No comments were received, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. And I don't believe there are any call-ins either.
No one has signed up or requested to speak.
All right. So we will move on to our next item on the agenda. That is the approval of the minutes. We have before us the minutes of the December 2nd meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Commissioner Curd.
I move to approve the December 2nd meeting minutes.
And Commissioner Alderks, I think I saw you raise your hand as well.
I second the motion.
So it has been moved and seconded that we adopt the minutes of the December 2nd meeting. Is there any discussion around those minutes? Seeing no indication of anyone wanting to raise anything, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes? And Commissioner Gustafson, are you? Okay, I see unanimous approval of the minutes. So the December 2nd minutes are approved as submitted. New business. I believe we have an item of new business before us. Director Cotterman?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. So this evening, I would like to introduce Kirsten Mant, who's a planner in our current planning group. She's typically involved in reviewing project applications, site plan applications, subdivisions, those types of projects. She has helped out tremendously over the last several months since Bruce Blackburn's retirement. She's picked up the responsibility of working on the Buildable Lands report that the city has to provide, the information we have to provide to both King and Snohomish County regarding our Buildable Lands activity over the last 7 or 8 years. And she's also working with the technical groups for both King and Snohomish counties on the growth targets that we'll be using for our comp plan update in a few years. And that effort is just getting underway. And we thought we'd have her come and give you an update on where the work is on those 2 projects right now. So Kirsten, would you
Take it away. Here, let me share
take it away, please?
my screen here. All right. Okay. So like Mike said, I'm just going to do a brief presentation on kind of where we're at with buildable lands and the work we've done over about the last year from when I started working with Bruce on it.
Kirsten,
Yes.
for some reason, we're seeing your presentation mode. We're not seeing the slideshow.
Oh, I
And
just
every
did
once
it.
in a while, it switches to your Outlook.
Great. I haven't shared in a WebEx yet. So what are you seeing the presentation now?
We're still seeing the presentation format. So we've got slide and next slide.
Okay.
It started out okay. I'm not sure what happened.
Hmm.
Can you do display at the bottom? Excuse me. Or, yeah, display settings.
How about that? I've tried going back and forth.
No, that's what we're seeing already.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me see if I can share from a different tray. Just gotta love WebEx. Okay. Can you tell me what you're seeing now?
Nope, same thing. Just go ahead.
How about that?
There.
Okay.
There we are.
Success? Wonderful. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. All right. So, in the most general terms, buildable lands, it just estimates remaining land capacity. Like Mike said, we have to do it every 8 years, and we're split between counties. So we work with Snohomish County and King County separately. And again, as Mike mentioned, the goal is to get to what our growth targets are going to be to inform our comp plan updates for 2024. And lucky for us, again, because we're split between 2 counties, we were working with 2 different sort of methodologies. They're fairly different to get to figuring out our capacity. So I wanted to just also take a look at what has been our growth over the last 20 years. As you can see, we've been growing pretty steadily, particularly sharply over the last sort of 6 years or so. The jog in 2013 is from an annexation, which is why that's a little bit funky, but you can definitely see our sort of rate of growth started to really take off after that. In King County, the data we've gotten so far is looking at what we've achieved between 2006 and 2018 versus the targets that were originally set most recently for 2035. As you can see, we're pacing really well for both housing units and jobs in King County, way ahead for jobs especially. We're already 50% of our target, even though only about 41% of time has been elapsed. So looking at Snohomish County for the same time period, again, we're pacing pretty well. We're slightly behind on housing units, but as we know, development isn't a straight line. We're always kind of give and take. So we're still pretty good with, we think, with where we're on target for housing units. And again, well ahead on jobs, not an issue for us there. In terms of the work we've done in King County, so for the last about a year, we've been working on the data collection portion and analysis. That's getting at what has happened up until now. Throughout this winter, we've been meeting with the Core Cities group with King County staff to discuss the data collection done thus far and their work to start looking at what our growth targets might be. And then the ultimate deadline is the end of June of 2021 is when the report is due from the county. Snohomish County, again, a little bit different. Most of the work of the last year has been meeting with various committees to confirm the new methodology or confirm the methodology they wanted to use for the data analysis. And they did a lot of that data collection themselves, which is a little different from King County. We did just meet with them last week to really start reviewing that data. And they want us to work on confirming the points that they've achieved to make sure we have accurate information for the analysis for capacity. So we expect to be able to finish that portion by mid-January and then start looking at capacity and growth targets in the late winter through the spring. And again, buildable lands is due at the end of the month. So initial estimates from King County we have from the analysis done thus far. We have about a capacity of a little under 6,200 housing units. And this is on about 290 acres of developable residential land, and about half of that is in the R9600 zone. It's interesting. Non-residential land, we're just under about 2 million square feet. They haven't done a full translation of what that means for jobs, but we've talked about trying to do a little bit of an analysis using the past BLR assumptions and using the range of jobs per square footage from prior years. That translates to about 3,200 to 5,500 jobs on about 75 acres of non-residential buildable land. In terms of targets, these are super, super early days. This is the very first kind of stab at a range that they've given us. So you can see we have a very initial range estimate for housing units of about 3,700 to 8,000 and jobs about 4,200 to almost even 13,000. So that's a really wide range. And this is based on some very, very detailed work that the county has been doing to try and estimate what would make sense. In terms of Snohomish County, again, they're not quite at that phase yet, so we'll have more information beginning of next year. So I already kind of touched on this, but next steps are really just for King County, start to draft and refine our targets throughout the winter and spring and get to some final numbers so that could be integrated into their report for the end of June. And for Snohomish County, again, we're going to meet in January to finalize past density questions and get that data really set, and then start looking at capacity estimates through the spring. And again, similar timeline, need to have it all approved by the end of June and sent out. That's all I have. And then there's questions from the commission. Happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
All right. Could you unshare your screen? So there we go. So Commissioner Kirk.
Thanks. This is Karsten. Thanks so much for the presentation. It's good to hear that things are still progressing, even without Bruce.
We do miss him.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that's a lot of work. I have a question. Back in 2015, there was a comp plan update with the buildable lands analysis included, and that's it talked a lot about the deficit in capacity in Snohomish County, and it seems like that's been kind of a historic trend in Bothell since annexing portions of Snohomish County. And I'm wondering if that's sort of a systemic issue, or if you think that it might still be too early, but other residential areas like Country Village redevelopment and in Canyon Park, are we starting to see that the gap is closing a little bit?
It's really hard for me to say in Snohomish County because we haven't even really got to that point in the data collection. But that's certainly some information we'll have a better idea of in January. Like I said, with Snohomish County as of right now, we're really trying to finalize what's on the ground currently in terms of identifying even what a parcel is in terms of redevelopable or developable. So they haven't even fully tallied all of that. So yeah, it's still maybe a little early days for that as of right now.
I could add a little anecdotal information to that. I think part of it, I think, is systemic, Commissioner Curd, because what we saw last year when we were doing the minimum FAR amendment that we brought to you, and we were looking at North Creek and Canyon Park, particularly the RAC zones that were there. And Bruce looked at what was estimated by the growth, by the buildable lands for each of the two counties, because those happen to be in the two different counties. And what we saw was in King County, they assumed a much higher density for that RAC zone in the North Creek area than what Snohomish County had calculated for the Canyon Park area. So I think part of it has to do with the methodology that was used in the last buildable lands. And that was one of the things that the state addressed in some of the later legislation to provide more consistency, which is now being applied this time around. So I think we'll see some additional capacity calculations for the Snohomish County area than what we've seen in the past.
That makes sense. Thanks. I guess just to tack on another question to that, sorry. With the RAC designation, the zoning residential activity center, is that kind of are we moving away from such a broad zoning category? I know with Canyon Park, we really focused away from leaving it wide open, but is that helping the buildable lands analysis to further define zones?
I guess I'm wondering can you rephrase the question? Are you talking about changes to the RAC zoning that would affect buildable lands, or changes to Canyon Park that would affect buildable lands?
Yeah, that wasn't a great question. Sorry. I guess the fundamental portion of my question is whether the RAC zoning designation is really even relevant, or if it's just sort of a catch-all that we're throwing at places that we'd like to kind of hold off on giving capacity without further specifying what we're expecting there.
I think that it might be impacted by what's happening or may not be happening with the minimum density situation. I'm not entirely certain where that discussion is at. To speak to Mike's earlier point, we have been working with Snohomish County, one of the topics of discussion at the last meeting, in terms of how to count potential density for RAC mixed zones. We have had some new developments come in King County that can try and help inform that. That'll probably be more like what we're going to see in Canyon Park, certainly what we want to see. But in terms of actual changes to the zoning designation, I'm not really aware of any other than the minimum density code changes that are currently in a bit of a limbo.
Yeah, and that's correct. And I think the broader question that you may be asking there, Commissioner Curd, has to do with the future use of the RAC designation, and are we moving away from that? We did that intentionally in Canyon Park, primarily because we wanted to make sure we preserve the employment areas there. As you recall, the discussion that we had with the commission on that, that may or may not apply in other parts of the city. And I think that's certainly will be a topic of discussion as we work on the comp plan update. And I think Dave has a little more on the history of the RAC and how those designations were decided. You muted, Dave.
In the downtown sub area, downtown was prior to the downtown plan was also zoned RAC, and it wasn't producing the kind of development that we wanted. So it's similar to Canyon Park. We tweaked the zoning in both downtown and Canyon Park and in Canyon Park actually added more height in the areas where we did want housing, dense housing, and also trying to get away from developers. And for whatever reason, I can't say that I understand, but in Snohomish County, we're getting townhouse development in RAC zoning. We're getting a little bit of that in King County in the proposals in around the Seattle Times building, but it's mixed with more dense apartment housing. So I would say as we go and do more detailed planning for some of the areas where we do want to see denser growth, our activity centers. We probably will continue to move away from RAC to a more detailed designation.
Understood. Thanks everyone for the clarification.
Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Aldrichs.
Commissioner Aldrichs here. Thank you for the presentation. This is sounds like Commissioner Curd has some familiarity with this process, new to me. And I would just ask, how is the pandemic affecting your work and changing what's kind of typical for this time frame?
As of right now, it doesn't really seem to be having a huge impact other than sort of the pushing back in the timeline of some of the meetings we've had. If you're curious about how the pandemic may or may not be impacting the actual growth targets or any of that stuff, one of the things we have talked about with King County is they just don't have enough information yet to know. Kind of long story short, but it sounds like there is an opportunity in probably 2022 when OFM has updated census data to potentially tweak some of the numbers if there's large discrepancies or big issues that they see from what's happened. So yeah, long story short, not really sure. As of right now, they're not taking that into account, but with the potential to in the future if it becomes an issue.
Other questions or comments? So to clarify, I assume that in defining buildable lands, you're going to exclude sensitive areas. But there are other exclusions, open rights of way, for instance, or any other major elements which would make land not buildable?
Right. So King County and Snohomish County are a tiny bit different. King County excludes critical areas and buffers, rights of way, and I think utilities tracks and like shared open space, things like that. That wouldn't be considered part of the buildable area on a subdivision. Snohomish County does what they called buildable lands area, and I think that they just exclude roads and critical areas and critical area buffers. So the goal is to look at what's actually developable square footage, developable acreage.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Thank you for your presentation on this. I found it interesting. I think the rest of the commissioners did as well. And we look forward to seeing the results later in the year. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
So the next item on our agenda is the study session on the housing code amendments, continued from November 4th. So Dave, you're going to lead that one?
Yeah, I'll give a quick introduction and then turn it over to our consultants. We're joined tonight also by Christina Hayworth and Sierra Carson from OTAC, who are helping us work through these code amendments. The other thing I wanted to note is, as we've been working on these code amendments dealing with allowing corner lot duplexes in single family zones and increasing the size of short plats from 4 to 9 lots, we've identified some related amendments in Title 17, Transportation, and Boyd Benson is going to join us in the presentation to talk about those. And also, while we're delving into Title 17, they did have on the docket for 2020 some Title 17 housekeeping amendments, some just cleaning up some items in Title 17. So we decided it would make sense to wrap those in along with the other Title 17 amendments that are related to the two housing amendments. So we're introducing those tonight, and hopefully that'll be a pretty seamless transition to include those. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christina. You're going to share your screen for the presentation? Or do you want me to?
Yes,
Okay.
I can share my screen.
Okay, great. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the presentation. Is it looking good?
Excellent.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So we are revisiting our housing code amendments to discuss some of the follow-up items that you requested from our last meeting on November 4th. So we'll talk again a little bit about the purpose of the amendments and the process, just so that everybody is up to speed. And then we'll talk about the follow-up items related to the duplex amendments and the follow-up items related to the short plat amendments. This is where Boyd will chime in with some information about the proposed Title 17 amendments. And then we identified a few issues that we are requesting some more specific feedback from the planning commissioners on. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. Okay, so why housing code amendments? Some of this might look familiar. So these housing code amendments are initiated through House Bill 1923, which was adopted to increase residential building capacity and improve housing choice and affordability for residents within the region, but also statewide. In association with HB 1923, there are grant funds available, and there are also some very attractive exemptions from SEPA and GMA appeals associated with taking some specific actions identified in HB 1923. As part of our process, we looked at a number of planning and code documents, and we are proposing amendments within titles 11, 12, 14, 15, and 17. And then the amendments in 17 plus the amendments in the Bothell Design and Construction Standards and Specifications are being closely coordinated with Public Works. So our process so far, we are in the Planning Commission phase. Clearly, we've had a little bit of outreach with the Development Services Advisory Group up to this point with our draft amendments. And we had our introduction of this item with Planning Commission on the November 4th meeting. So right now we're here with our follow-up. Going forward, we expect to be wrapping up any final changes based on your comments, issuing public notice, and coming back to you in mid-January for the public hearing on this item. After that, we will conduct our SEPA review and take these to City Council for hopefully adoption in the early part of next year. The issues that we'll be focusing on in this presentation are primarily driven by your request for additional information at our last meeting. You requested some information on fees and building square footages. Those are more ancillary items that I included quite a bit of information in the memo that was part of your packet. I've chosen not to focus on those in this presentation, but if you do have questions, let me know and I can pull up that memo and we can talk about those. What I do want to talk about in this meeting are your requests to consider options to incentivize or require retention of existing dwelling units and provision of flexible parking options for duplexes. And I did also want to call attention to some new code language that had been included in the memo in our November 4th packet. We did not include information for the SVV zone, the Sunrise Valley View neighborhood. That was an oversight, and it is now included in the recommended code amendments. So that's new, but very consistent with the language that you've already seen for duplexes on corner lots. Okay, here we go. All right, so duplexes on corner lots. This is action one of the two actions that the city of Bothell will be taking, and this is to authorize a duplex on every corner lot in all zoning districts that permit single-family residences. We have recommended authorizing this through amendments to the residential use table with some specific footnotes that describe the circumstances under which the duplexes would be authorized, plus any, we've also, in this case, included some incentives. That's where those will appear now. And then these are supported by some amendments within the design and construction standards and specifications. These are some examples of duplexes that fit really effectively within single family residential neighborhoods, just as a reminder of what we might see in our neighborhoods built with this code. All right. So we were asked to consider both requiring and incentivizing retention of existing units. And upon review, our team and the city's current planning staff strongly recommend the incentive option, and that is what is reflected in the recommended code amendments. This really helps with reducing barriers associated with existing site or building configurations that can be challenging to work with when you're trying to retrofit an existing unit. So our proposed amendments include incentives, and we had identified these 3 incentives. So allowing the matching of existing nonconformities, for example, with setbacks or height on an existing unit, and then some options to increase lot coverage standards to help facilitate existing site development conditions. You also asked us to look at flexible parking options. These are, our suggestions are modeled on the existing parking reductions near transit stops. And that's where the recommended amendments that we've presented tonight are located, that code section. So this would allow an exception to reduce parking spaces to 1 per unit. So it's still incumbent upon the property owner or applicant to request that. But it is now an option that's available. And it does require location near a transit stop that provides frequent service on a daily basis. Our short plat amendments, as a reminder, so this is the second of the 2 actions. This allows for the division or redivision of land up to 9 lots. So it's currently 4 lots, and we're recommending increasing that up to 9 lots. And that includes amendments within the definition section of the code, some related amendments to raise thresholds for planned unit developments and SEPA categorical exemptions, overhauling the application requirements to be a little more consistent with what is actually needed to process one of these applications and consistent with a longer plat application process in terms of the level of detail of information that is needed. And then Public Works will talk about eliminating frontage improvement exemptions. Those are the Title 17 amendments. So, Boyd, if you'd like to chime in.
Yes, for sure. And I'd start video, but I think if I do so, I'll lose all connectivity. So I'll try to do my best here just speaking. So first, thank you for having Public Works to present this information tonight. Just a few substantive items are being proposed, and the first one I'd like to discuss is the short plat improvements. So typically what Public Works does is we keep a running list of code amendments we'd like to see or suggest in the future, and this is one that was near the top of the list of Title 17. So currently, long subdivisions and most all other development entitlement projects must install pedestrian frontage improvements. The city of Bothell is relatively unique within our municipal code. There are some exemptions for short plats and single family residential lots. This is not typical with both short and long subdivisions that frontage improvements are installed. So I'd like to describe that really quickly, just for a few minutes. So the current exemptions are if you're a short plat and there are not sidewalks within 250 feet, or if you're a corner lot, or if you're a local access street with no other pedestrian improvements, the code allows no installation of sidewalk improvements. The current code, though, does state that pedestrian pathways must be installed. And we'd like to clean this up to be consistent with our long subdivision process in other cities. And what I've shown you in this slide is an image up on 101st. And what it shows is a short plat on a corner. I like this example quite a bit, where they only installed sidewalk on one side. And then what happened is we ended up having a plat further along, you can see that asphalt pathway that then had to come back and install that pathway to satisfy a safe walk to school route. So what we see with this exemption is a short plat may come in, they may be exempt, they may not install their sidewalk, and then the adjacent short plat or development may have to install that for them, or even worse, that we may find that that short plat is also exempt from sidewalk. So once again, short plats, current exemptions exist, and we're recommending that these exemptions be removed. And I will say we did look at other cities, Redmond, Kirkland, Bellevue, Woodinville, Marysville, and no other cities have similar exemptions for short plats. For the single lot residential front end improvements, we're recommending a similar approach, but to provide some relief, create a threshold where if the redevelopment value is more than 50% of the existing improvements, then the improvements, the frontage improvements are installed. The reason we're looking at this is this would only apply to existing vacant lots, basically, not recent lots created by a development or subdivision, but just vacant lots. Let's say a vacant lot in Valhalla or one of the smaller lots in the downtown core. And the way we try to set this up is if it's an alteration, a remodel, an expansion that's less than 50%, where they're not really impacting the system with additional pedestrian trips and the rest, or redevelopment, then we'd say, okay, you don't need to install frontage improvements, but if it's over 50%, if it's a vacant lot, and you're installing a home, or you're demolishing a home, or constructing a home, saying, yes, please do install the frontage improvements. This is somewhat similar to most of the cities we looked at. Some cities, such as Woodinville, set a dollar threshold. Redmond has a dollar threshold. If the work is more than $100,000, then you must install full frontage. That seems, I mean, all these numbers are they're just thresholds, but setting a dollar threshold did not seem like a good way to go. So we went to the 50%. And then the last one, to provide some additional relief to single lot residential development, we put in a caveat there that the cost of the frontage improvements are not to exceed 25% of the redevelopment value. And the reason we're looking at that is if you build a home on a vacant lot and it's $500,000, the frontage improvements could be very, very expensive. So in a situation such as this, we limit those values to 25%, and we just do our best through the deviation process to document that and make sure that there is at least some type of pedestrian pathways and frontage improvements installed to get people across those lots. You may not see the full concrete curb gutter sidewalk landscape. You may see something slightly less, but you'd still be pushing to get those improvements in. Next slide, please. And the rest are just basically housekeeping. I've outlined those items within the memo. There's some definitions that are outdated. Processes and procedures with respect to permitting and permit timelines. Landscape maintenance. Currently, municipal code requires that the adjacent property owner maintain and keep clear the sidewalk. It's intended to apply to the landscape as well to make sure that it does not block signs or site distance for the rest. So we're recommending that be added. And then capital projects. I put that in there. Currently, capital projects are exempt from right-of-way and grading permit processing, and we're looking to tie in utility work to that. So if a capital project's replacing a water main and they're exempt from the right-of-way permit process, to install that water main, we're recommending they're also exempt from the utility permit process. That's what I have to present tonight.
Okay, let's unshare and hope you have some requests.
Yes, so these are, and thank you, Boyd. Sorry about the slide advancement issue. Anyway, so yes, we do have some staff requests for planning commissioner review and feedback. These are outlined in the packet with a little bit more detail, but I wanted to summarize them here. So we are looking for any feedback that you have, any thoughts on the elimination of frontage improvements, any concerns that you might have with that proposal. Feedback on the selected incentive options for retaining existing units, whether you have any concerns with what we have selected, or if you have ideas for any other incentives that maybe we didn't present to you tonight. And then any feedback on options for flexible parking standards. So is the buffer that we're showing in the amendments adequate, or should that be increased or decreased, or if there are any other again, any other options that you'd like us to take a closer look at. So with that, that concludes the presentation. And if you have any questions, otherwise, I look forward to getting your feedback.
First, let's see if folks have any questions, and then I'll ask you to roll back to the slides where you're asking for feedback, and we'll address those individually. So, Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Christina and Boyd. I had kind of a series of questions about the Public Works part of the presentation about the frontage improvements. So trying to follow the slide, are we saying that even if there's no adjacent sidewalk around these lots, they would still need to build a sidewalk after these changes? Is that the proposed, am I understanding that right?
Yeah, correct. So for short plats, just like for subdivisions, long subdivisions, the requirement they have to install those frontage improvements, whether they're sidewalks or not, to mitigate their increased pedestrian traffic. And what we see is if we don't get that done, we end up having a patchwork built where we don't get sidewalk connectivity. The single lot residential, that's different. That's just tied to the percent threshold value.
Okay, sorry, I don't know if it's only happening for me, but your audio cuts out just a bit. So
I'm so
my
sorry.
apologies.
No, I'm sorry. Really bad DSL out here.
Oh no. Okay, I just want to make sure I was understanding that correctly. And then, so I'm going to sit on it for a minute, see if anybody else has questions. Thank you.
Okay, other questions, commissioners? I'm kind of jumping back and forth to see you all. And Commissioner Alders.
Jenny Alders here. I guess I would like to better understand the kind of the implications of particularly this situation here that is on the slide, where you have part of a sidewalk that has been completed, and what is the kind of what do you think the frequency will be of situations that we encounter like this, where there's more sidewalk needed to be installed, but it's not included in the frontage improvement requirements? Or are these incentives? Sorry, I'm trying to keep track of things in my head here. And then if there is a case like this at any great frequency, what's the plan to address it moving forward, and where do those improvements come from in the future?
No, for sure. And that's a great question. And I'll do a little better job, and I'll try to speak closer to the computer so I'm heard. So the image you see down below on this slide, the short plat had frontage improvement would have, under the current proposal, would have completed full frontage on both sides. So you see a nice concrete sidewalk on one side, on the left side, and you see an asphalt path on the right. That type of construction is allowed currently in current exemptions. The proposed change would have required that short plat to put in their full frontage concrete sidewalks on both sides. So that's kind of thing one. Thing two, the question you bring up is if these exemptions continue to exist, who's going to install the sidewalk? And the answer is the sidewalks won't be installed for quite some time. And the reason I say that is we typically get these type of frontage improvements with development and redevelopment on local access streets such as these. The city typically does not have the funds for capital projects to install these missing links. So the whole purpose of this approach to remove these exemptions is to make sure we don't see what you see in that image below in the future.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. we will chalk it up to my unfamiliarity as I learn this process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add a little bit to that as well, as far as the gaps go? There is very little money available for building new sidewalks, even with our Safe Streets levy. That funding is pretty much solely targeted at safe routes to schools. Rightly so, that should be our top priority. But other priority pedestrian connections, like the connection between downtown and the campus, didn't qualify for that funding, even though Valley View has a number of gaps and has a couple of new single-family homes that qualified for the exemption and didn't build sidewalks, even though it's been identified for many years as a priority pedestrian connection. So I think these exemptions will certainly avoid those situations. The gaps that would exist with the removal of these exemptions would theoretically be filled over time with as redevelopment occurs.
Other Commissioner Gustafson and then Commissioner Hurd.
Thank you. Sarah Gustafson here, just on this same topic. This is a very interesting question, and that's a great photo. Thanks for the presentation. This all sounds good, like really a good benefit for the city. Is there any potential cost? Would it create more difficulties for homeowners? Would it make it more unlikely that we'd see short plats subdivided into more housing stock? Anything else we should consider?
That's a very good question as well. And the answer is, with respect to maintenance, when you see in that image below, the concrete sidewalk there is going to last decades. So when infrastructure is installed correctly per the city's standards, it has a long lifespan and low operation maintenance. That asphalt path that was not to standards, it was something that was allowed by this exemption, does not have a similar lifespan. And the reason this really came to a head is the folks that live adjacent to this site saw this asphalt path go in. It's not the only reason we're looking at this, but the reason I showed this image is they said, hey, where's our concrete sidewalk? Why is everyone else getting concrete sidewalks? And the answer is, well, these folks were exempt and they're installing an asphalt path. So that's the first one. So for the residential owner and neighbors, the full frontage is a better way to go. It lasts longer. It's as you can see, it's a much more amenable improvement. For short plats and the developers, it will cost more money. However, as I said, I could not find one other city that exempts short plats in this fashion, because this is subdivision land. You're taking one lot and you're subdividing it and providing a greater burden. You're providing more pedestrian trips, vehicle trips. You should mitigate those impacts. Development should pay for development and shouldn't saddle the cities or neighbors with these type of lower quality improvements. So yeah, I'm sure that there are some developers out there that think this is a great exemption. Like I say, this is not typical with other cities, and we're recommending that those exemptions be removed for short plats. So we see full frontage and quality improvements.
All right, Commissioner Curd, you had a question?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is Karsten. I do have another question just to tack on to this Title 17 amendments, which is, are there options for the community to fix some of the gaps, such as this asphalt path? If the community did take a big issue with this and had the funds or had the impetus to pull together resources to make a sidewalk, is there any sort of framework for that? Or are we just waiting until this corner house gets redeveloped later on?
There are options, and once again, I hope I was clear that the reason that sidewalk is asphalt, not concrete, is because of this exemption. This short plat only had to put sidewalks on one side. We're trying to get rid of that. So if this approach is supported, we shouldn't see this happen in the future. Your question about could residents take care of issues like this? They could, and we've had some folks come in, and we do our best to make sure in permitting that process is as simple as possible, because they're doing some good work for everyone. The problem is it's unfortunately pretty expensive to do this work, and it's usually more than what homeowners or homeowner associations really want to do. But we're always welcome to assist.
Thank you.
Other commissioner questions, comments? I've got a question, kind of linking the two elements of this these amendments. What would the requirements, if any, be on a corner lot being redeveloped for duplex? Are there frontage requirements there if there are no frontage improvements on that corner?
Good question. So currently, if under the current requirements, if there are no sidewalks within 240 feet, they would not have to install sidewalks. They still have to install some paths. You'd see something like that asphalt path. And also there's an exemption for corner lots only having to install sidewalk on one side. So that's the current. In the proposed version, it would be tied to that dollar threshold. If someone redeveloped and built a duplex if it's an existing home that's converted to a duplex, it probably wouldn't exceed the 50% threshold, so as is. If it was a new duplex on a vacant lot and it exceeded that 50% threshold, they'd be installing sidewalks on both frontages.
Okay, thank you. So shall we go to the slide with the specific points you're asking for feedback on? All right, so the first item, concerns with elimination of exemptions, or any exemptions that need to be considered. Commissioner feedback? Commissioner Olson?
I'm a little worried that it will increase the cost of development, but I also think it's not, and I guess I'm kind of seeking some of our city planners confirmation that it's not really small development outfits that are doing these short plat developments. It's larger companies. I guess I'm interested in an exemption for duplexes that are created by converting an existing house. I don't think it makes sense to make someone like build a brand new sidewalk when they're just converting an existing residence to a duplex, but I'm curious what everyone else thinks.
Any comments?
So Commissioner Olson, Boyd Benson, I'll just chime in. That's a good question as well. But once again, if it's an existing home and they convert it to a duplex, if they didn't exceed that increase in 50% of value, they would not be installing frontage improvements. So if you basically cut a home in two, make two dwelling units, they'd be okay. It'd only apply if it was a vacant lot. And then I don't know if Dave or Kirsten could chime in on short plats and development. Homes in Bothell are pretty expensive, and many of these short plats are done by larger developers, but I'd love to hear what new development has to say.
So
I would just add that we haven't heard from the development community, although they received this part of the packet just last week when you did. So they will have an opportunity to chime in between now and at the public hearing on January 20th. I would add to Boyd's comment about the 50% threshold of the cost of the improvements, that I think the 25% of the total cost for the frontage improvements could more likely come into play on a corner lot that has greater amount of frontage, and which may wind up in prioritizing one frontage over the other. I don't know, Boyd, if you have any thoughts to add to that.
No, and we haven't seen many of these. Once again, with the exemptions, they're supposed to put in at least a path. But yeah, I think what David Boyd said is correct. We try to get as much as we can. Make sure there's a gutter line for storm drainage. Make sure there's some type of vegetative buffer, hopefully a landscape strip of some sort. And then if it's not concrete, then it's asphalt. Just to at least get the improvements in and not exceed that 25%. But once again, with the price of home development in Bothell, unfortunately, the homes are typically of a higher value. And typically, I think we'd see these improvements be installed with full standards with concrete sidewalks and landscape strips.
So I thought I saw Commissioner Gustafson and Commissioner Alders raise their hands. Commissioner Gustafson first. Do you have a question or comment?
Sarah Gustafson here. I think my comment on what Commissioner Olson said, I'll leave it till the incentive options section. So.
All right, Commissioner Alders.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my question here is, how does the cost, I forget the term that you're using for it, but the requirement that is tied to, cost of the property, how is that affected if say this development that's going in is intended to be affordable housing, and therefore it's less expensive to build or in some way, and would it be that we have like an equity issue that would be created here where affordable housing would go in, but because of the improvement requirements, they wouldn't have to do the frontage, and then you have kids who, well, I guess with the schools it would have to. Sorry, you guys make this really nice and complicated, and it's interesting how well you do that, but it's not a bad thing. I like all the details and seeing how it all fits together. But so I hope that that is a clear question. If I were to restate it, how would the frontage requirements be affected if what went in on that plot was affordable housing? That is the question.
Great question. Then I'll be asking Dave Boyd a question about that as well in a second. But first, once again, the code already requires, even if you're exempt from full frontage, which is curb, gutter, sidewalk, landscape strip, and concrete sidewalk, you still have to put a, and we retain that language no matter what. So no matter what goes in, even in Title 12, you have to provide pedestrian pathways. You just have to do it. I mean, it's in RCW, Revised Code of Washington. So that remains. With respect to affordable housing, there's two ways to look at this. Do we want to relax our standards to promote affordable housing? I mean, that's a good way to go. The other, what you bring up is social equity. Do we want to make sure affordable housing still has the improvements and the amenities that we expect to see? And the answer is yes. So I'll tell you, this wasn't written to address affordable housing, but if there was a vacant lot and affordable housing came in and installed 2 homes for a much less value, the first thing we'd look at is it over 50%? It was a vacant lot, it'd be yes. And the next one is, how do we make sure we don't burden that developer too much or those folks too much? And that's why we've added that 25% cap. We've found that nowhere else in any other codes we've looked at. It's a safeguard for, I think, developers and residents to make sure that those improvements aren't super expensive, but we still get the minimum pedestrian paths. I hope I answered your question. Dave Boyd, do you have anything to add to that, please?
I think you covered it. And the key point was me is that if we do allow exemptions for affordable housing for features that everybody should have, that does raise equity issues. So I think we need to be careful there. I think that a more modest development will, in addition to a home, to create a duplex, for example, if it's a modest addition, it'll more likely meet that 50% exemption. And similarly, a less expensive development will have a lower threshold to meet the 25% exemption as well. But in general, I don't think we want to say that affordable housing shouldn't have sidewalks, for example.
Heard.
Thanks, Chair. This is Karsten. The way I'm looking at this is from the perspective of getting the end goal here, which is a network of pedestrian access through our city. And it's a lot easier to install improvements like sidewalks and gutters and curbs when there's already major equipment at the site, when it's already undergoing development. Remobilizing equipment and concrete trucks and redoing permitting later on is just not, that's a waste of resources. And so I'm really supportive of eliminating the exemptions. I think that it makes sense long-term and ecologically to do that while still preserving the end goal, which is a network of pedestrian infrastructure. So that's where I'm standing.
Looking, I don't see anyone else commenting on this. The other point I would raise, I think, would be continuing on Commissioner Kurd's comment, was one of the things we looked at was reducing parking requirements within a certain radius of transit. And I think having good pedestrian infrastructure is really important if we're to move people away from using their parking and driving and instead walking. So that's my thought on that one. So we talked about both points. Dave, do you feel like you've gotten feedback?
Yes, I think that we got some great feedback. Thank you very much.
Okay, then let's move to the next question. Feedback on incentive options for retaining existing units. Questions or comments around that? Commissioner Kurd first, then Commissioner Gustafson, only because of where you are on the ribbon.
Commissioner Gustafson can go first.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kurd. This discussion about retaining existing units, my knowledge of this subject actually comes from a California proposal to keep the structures instead of demolishing them. And I looked back at the proposal. What they actually were trying to do was put in a provision that would prevent demolitions if there were renters in that unit over the last actually 7 years. So I am bringing that provision up, see if there are any instances in which the city might require the retention of the existing structure if it has been historically a rental property. And I understand that this could be very costly and time-consuming perhaps not bringing a great benefit to Bothell, but I did feel like the need to bring it up to be discussed by the commission. Thank you.
So let me restate and see if I heard what it was. So there's an incentive or maybe a requirement to preserve existing housing stock where it has been in the rental market as opposed to owner occupied. Is that the issue, Commissioner Christensen?
Yes, and I believe the idea is that you can convert it to a duplex. It's just that you need to retain the existing structure. And I am actually not sure of the logic behind this, but my understanding is that at least if you are retaining the existing structure, you're not putting in a luxury duplex that would require new construction rents.
Commissioners, comments, questions? Does staff have a thought on that approach? Seeing back and forth, not seeing any feedback there. I think the concern I'm hearing is the loss of rental properties and the upscaling of property, losing affordability.
Let me weigh in on that one. That is something that's a great question. To me, immediately it raises questions of, even if you're remodeling an existing structure that is a rental into a duplex, in all likelihood, that's going to displace the existing renters. It's probably going to be a fairly extensive remodel. It would be a rare situation where you could continue, and then the mechanism for that you'd have to go through to house those folks or make it possible for them to move back in, I think would be pretty complicated. But keeping it as a rental would, or at least keeping one of the units as a rental unit would be something that we could look into. We just haven't considered that, and it's something we can look into between now and the public hearing. I think it's going to be difficult. It's an area that we really haven't gotten into, and duplexes, by their nature, they're often both rental units. They're considered investment properties, but they're also fairly frequently situations where they're kind of an entry level housing ownership opportunity where you can live in one unit and rent out the other. An owner can live in one unit and rent out the other. So it's a complicated question. We can chew on that a bit.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This is Mike Cotterman. Just following up on what Dave said, I think that we do want to look into that some more. As I was thinking through what Commissioner Gustafson was describing, it made me think that what the reason for that particular requirement, and I'm not familiar with that specific situation, so I'm speculating a little bit here, trying to think through why they would do something in addition to just preserving it. It sounds like it might also be a way to prevent owners of the property from getting around rent control, which would, if you tear it down and build new, then it wouldn't be subject to the rent control. So I don't know if that's the case, but we'll look into that a little bit more. So I think, like Dave said, we want to understand that a little bit more. We're really not set up to do the type of monitoring enforcement that would be necessary for that type of a situation. But if we can get a better understanding of why it's in place and how it's being used, then we can maybe work through how, if there's a way that we can incorporate some aspect of that into the ordinance. I think in the interim, though, if we, depending on what we find out, if we can move forward with the incentive option, if that is amenable to the commission, just to make sure we've got that still moving forward, and we'll see what we can find out about the other.
So there were some suggestions for incentives. Did those look good to commissioners? Any questions? I'll scroll back and forth. Not seeing any questions raised. Commissioner Gustafson. Yes.
Oh, excuse me, did Commissioner Kurd want to speak? Am I getting in line ahead of him before I jump in again?
No. Stuff you're on, not on the same screen.
Okay. Sarah Gustafson here. I'm thinking that the incentives are good, but I think we might want to brainstorm some more bold incentives if we wanted to. And I am always going to throw out, well, let's see if we want to allow parking reductions for the duplexes that do retain the existing structures, even if they don't fall within the radius. That could be kicking up a subject that the city council doesn't want to go into, but throwing it out there.
So I thought I heard two bases for interest in retaining existing units. One was a environmental interest, not wasting the existing structure or tearing down something that works and throwing it away. And the other interest I heard was concern about affordability. Did that capture the thoughts? First of all, the interests we're looking for, Commissioner Gustafson.
The third would be neighborhood character and architectural harmony.
Okay. Yes, that was also discussed, yes. So, commissioners, is that kind of ballpark we're playing in? Commissioner Kurd?
Thanks. This is Karsten. I want to push back on the neighborhood character concern. That isn't representative of what I feel. My concern is housing stock, and that the city is growing unaffordable, and that in a crisis of housing, I don't want to make incentives or requirements around architectural styles when we're in a crisis.
Commissioner Olson?
Thanks. I just want to second what Commissioner Kurd said. I can appreciate the concerns about neighborhoods, but I really think that that's best left to neighborhood associations, and it shouldn't be codified. You know, we need housing more than we need to focus on that in my mind. So, seconded.
Other commissioner feedback? Okay, so those were the interests. I heard your interest in brainstorming other incentives. Commissioner Kurd did talk about parking. I think the next slide goes to parking, doesn't it?
It does. We
Yeah.
provided some code language on flexible parking standards near transit that would reduce parking from 2 spaces to 1 space.
So there's Commissioner Olson.
I think since we're talking about general housing, this is not specific to like senior housing or anything. In my mind, a half mile seems more appropriate. If you're going to be walking to transit, I mean, I don't think that's a stretch. but I'm curious what everyone else thinks.
Mr. Curd?
Thanks. This is Karsten. I'd also suggest we have 2 really great regional trails, and those can provide opportunities for people to commute or do shopping and their normal trips that way too. And so maybe proximity to trail infrastructure or other improvements besides just transit, although transit I do feel is very important.
Okay.
So broadening the buffer, setting aside the question of the amount of the buffer, but to include regional trails as well as transit. That's what I heard. Okay, yes, I think so. Comments, commissioners? So I heard 2 suggestions: increase the buffer to half mile and add proximity to trails.
Got it. Thank you.
Other, Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. So I wanted to maybe dig a little bit more into why I mentioned the architectural concerns. My thought was we hear a lot from residents that they're worried about too much change all at once. So my thought was almost allowing there to be a trade-off. If things seem to be staying the same with the architecture and the character of the neighborhood, then some of the changes that the Planning Commission seems to be in favor of, like reducing the parking for that unit, even if it's not close to a trail or a transit stop, might seem more palatable. Again, I don't know if this is actually something residents would feel is a reasonable trade-off here, but that's part of why I was bringing up the architectural issue in this case. And I don't think it necessarily needs to be codified and set precedent, but trying to figure out how these urbanist principles can mesh with some of the concerns that we've been hearing.
Okay, commissioners. Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. Commissioner Gustafson, thanks for commenting a little bit further on where you were going with the architectural comment. I hear you, and I hear the concerns of citizens too. Neighborhood character is really subjective in my mind anyway, and you know, there are craftsman style houses that don't look that great or they're made with, you know, vinyl siding or some you know, comparatively low cost surfacing, or there are other things that neighborhood character is so subjective that I don't think that there's really a way to even gauge it without turning it into sort of a design review board or putting too much focus on community development to make a decision without giving them enough guidance. And that just, it's too in-depth in my mind. I don't know if there's a creative way to approach it, but I'm so concerned about housing affordability and stock in the city as a renter who is in a potentially redevelopable corner lot. I don't want to get hung up on concerns of people who maybe have had stake in some of the practices of who gets to live in Bothell for a long time, without understanding that, you know, the city is changing and our whole region is changing, and that there are people in the future who can occupy these spaces too, and that maybe beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that I have strong feelings about here, and thanks for talking about where you were coming from as well. I appreciate that.
Dirks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners, for this conversation. I would ask the city staff, what would this process be like for staff to determine that a existing structure is maintaining its original architectural style that matches the architecture of the neighborhood? And is that something that, speaking to Commissioner Kurd's concern, is that something that the city is even involved in or has the bandwidth to do?
I was just checking quickly to see if Kirsten was still with us, since she does development review, and it looks like she isn't. But that's certainly something I can bring back to the development review staff. And when we've discussed this in the past, these kind of neighborhood character questions are difficult for staff to, sometimes they can be difficult for staff to adjudicate. I'm kind of thinking ahead to findings, and my sense is that we've heard some support for this idea of retaining existing structures for a number of reasons, including their contribution to the neighborhood character, but also including energy savings, cost savings, affordability. And as staff and working with the consultants, we've shied away from including in the requirements for duplexes, aesthetic concerns. But if we can tie the rationale for the incentives to some of these things that do resonate with some people, I guess I would say resonate with some people more than others, the idea of retaining some aspect of neighborhood character, maybe that's the way to kind of find a middle ground that has broader support.
So I have a few thoughts on this. First, and Dave, I'm going to assume you'll not in agreement to this, but there are requirements that will remain in place, such as setbacks, building height, buffers that, would require whatever development to fit at least within that envelope. So that's there either way. Then regarding neighborhood character, I'd say I'm in a neighborhood that was built by a developer in the mid 80s, and there is a certain style to it. And then there have been remodels. And as far as character, I'll just maybe make a snarky statement and say you can tell who's used an architect and who hasn't when they've done additions. So character can be interesting. And I'd also say if you go further, I'm near Kenya Park Middle School. And as you go closer to downtown where they were developed individually, you see new homes that look nothing like any of the ones next to them. So it is a challenge, I think, to apply citywide. Those are my thoughts on it. Mr. Olson?
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say I appreciate the story you're telling. My neighborhood up on Nike Hill was originally subdivided in the 60s, and there's some of those houses still present. My house was built in the 90s. The older house was just bulldozed for it. We happen to know the old owner of it. And there's a couple of houses that look like mine, like some developer found a bunch of people who needed houses right on our street, but not all together in the subdivision. And then there's a house next to me that I love, but it's clearly like super 80s. So it's just, the neighborhood character is do what you want. So I think it would be a struggle in a lot of parts of Bothell where we've had, larger lots that are slowly taken over into short plats and things. So I'm curious. I feel like that would be such a challenge for staff to determine, does it meet the character for a lot of neighborhoods? Anyway, thank you.
Can
Sorry, I called on you, but I didn't unmute myself.
Sorry, were you calling on me?
Yes, but I didn't
thank
unmute
you,
the
Chair.
first time.
Thank you. I made a prediction that would happen at least once this call. So I think what we're talking, these examples from your various neighborhoods, it speaks very much to, I think, neighborhoods that don't have HOAs, and so there is no kind of body legislating the architecture and character of the neighborhood. And so, yeah, you look around Bothell and you see it, right? Ultra modern next to, old craftsman, tiny cottage, and 80s, like all in the same block. And so the city hasn't, I would, you tell me, staff, the city hasn't gotten into this business of keeping consistent architectural styles in neighborhoods, and so it would be a strange time to do that now. That seems to be what I'm hearing.
I would agree that we haven't done it the way that HOAs do it, and I don't think we're interested in getting into that kind of business. It was a topic when we one of the first code amendments I worked on was accessory structures, and there had been some pushback about people building metal structures, large metal structures on single-family lots, so our code does have restrictions that accessory buildings should have similar roofing siding details as the primary structure, and there was some debate about whether that was going too far, but as far as doing it on a neighborhood scale, that's something that we haven't really tackled.
So next steps on this item, and we can go back if there are more comments, but I just want some context. So you'll be coming back to us with what, Dave?
We'll be coming back with a recommendation, with draft findings, unless commission really doesn't feel like they're ready to go to public hearing. But I think we are, and I wanted to. We heard from individual commissioners about parking reductions extending out a half mile and potentially parking reductions within a radius of regional trails. But I didn't get a sense whether there was any broad support for those.
Okay, if we take out the screen share and then maybe I can see everybody and be a little easier. Okay. Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. Yes, I did want to clarify for the record that I am not on the past subject, that I was not asking for extra architectural review boards or anything like that. I was just simply saying that this was one, just leave it as the retention of existing structures, whatever that's deemed to be, and not adding anything else. It just might be something to help people with the idea of the incremental change. So that's all I have to say. Just to clarify for the commission, I'm on board with you.
Okay. All right. So Dave, so you wanted to get a sense of the commission on the, we'll take them there are two issues. One, increasing the radius to a half mile. Yes, no.
And could I just add one aspect to that? At first, when we talked about extending the radius to half mile for with for the parking reductions for market rate housing. We decided to hold off on that so that we could analyze the whether there was a nexus for affordable housing requirements associated with that. In this case, and so I was initially, that's why we started with a quarter mile here. But when we're just talking about individual corner lots or even a subdivision, the number of duplexes is probably not going to be enough to trip the threshold for any affordable housing requirements. So I don't have that concern. But I would like to see how broad the support is on the commission.
So, interest in increasing the radius to a half mile? Yes, no. I see one no. Well, perhaps then we should take a vote. Well, I saw 4 yes and 1 no, so I think you've got a
yeah, that's good enough.
Dominance. We don't have a motion to vote on, so I don't want to go down that path. Speaking of paths, the second item then was proximity to trails. You like that, huh, Commissioner Olson? Couldn't help myself. Is there an interest in considering proximity to regional trails as far as parking reductions? And I see general consensus. So, Dave, that gets you what you need here?
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead.
Oh, we didn't have a lot of discussion about the other incentives, the allowing when there's a non-conforming situation, not allowing a setback to be reduced, but allowing a non-conforming wall to be lengthened, for example. And then the other one was the percentage increase in building coverage and hard surface coverage. Nobody raised any objections to those, so I'm going to assume that we're on the right track there.
So, Commissioner Olson, had your hand up?
Yeah, I guess I feel like I'm not familiar enough with building things to know. I mean, it sounds good to me. I'm assuming that you guys agree that that's a generous enough incentive to hopefully get some folks to keep their existing structures and change them. And I mean, it sounds good. Do you see any downsides or anything, Dave?
My only reluctance was that we started off saying that these would be allowed as long as they were in the same envelope as a single family home. And so that one nudges that a little bit. But I think, again, with the purpose of adding it as an incentive to retain existing structures, I think it's a modest enough incentive that is justifiable.
Thank you.
So, further discussion? Commissioner Curd?
Thanks. This is Karsten. I just guess I want to confirm that the impervious surface coverage is still tied to the stormwater manual, right? So that, cool. Thanks.
Good question. All right, so hearing no additional questions or objections, I think you can take that as consent or concurrence.
Thank you. And I did remember one thing I forgot to mention. The packet included exhibits 1 and 2. Exhibit 1 from a letter from Mike Pattison of the Snohomish County Master Builders, making the case that new construction can be more energy efficient, is often more energy efficient than renovated existing buildings. The email from Carrie Westerbeck encouraging the city to go beyond just corner lots as far as duplexes and even larger structures. And then Exhibit 3, which came in after the packet in response to Carrie's email, again, basically supporting his position that we should go further than just corner lot duplexes. So I just want to state those for the record that we now have 3 exhibits.
All right, thank you. And I believe, well, we all received those. I believe we all had the opportunity to review them. So, and I suspect we may hear again at the public hearing some of that. So, okay, well, I think we're at a good point then to stop on this item and move on to our final study session. Should we? Yes, Commissioner Olson.
Could we take a 5-minute break?
Which is what I was going to say. Should we take a 5-minute break? I hear interest. So Commissioner Gustafson? Yes. All right. I've got 7:37 on my screen. We'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
And the December 16th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission reconvenes after a brief break. We are now on to our second study session item, the 2021 preliminary planning docket, and also a little review of what was done in 2020. So, Dr. Gutterman, you want to lead us through that item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. My apologies up front. I have a very bad connection tonight. I've tried turning everything else off, so I'm hoping it will improve, but please bear with me. So I'm going to share my screen, I hope.
It worked?
Yes, have the attachment.
Okay, everyone can see that?
Yes.
Okay.
See nodding heads.
All right, thank you. So the first I want to just note that what we're presenting this evening is a preliminary docket for 2021. This is an annual process that we go through with the Planning Commission and with the City Council. There is no action by the Planning Commission either tonight or when we bring the draft recommendation back to you, most likely in January. It's really just to get to give the Commission an opportunity to provide some feedback if there are changes that you'd like to suggest in terms of priorities or items that you would suggest be added or deleted from the docket. The staff makes the recommendation to the council in this case, but we would certainly carry forward any commission suggestions for changes in priority or tasks. So with that, I wanted to first highlight the work that's been done in 2020 on the docket that we presented to the council back in February of this year. As you can see, we've made some significant progress on several different items. Those that are highlighted in the light blue are ones that have been completed this year. The ones that are in green are still underway, and I'll give you a quick status report on where we are on those. Some obviously are further along than others. And then there are a few, about 5 or so, I believe, that are in the purple color that we were not able to really get started on this year. I will say, based on my lengthy, almost 3 years experience now with the city of Bothell, that this is, I think, fairly representative of most years when we're able to accomplish some significant tasks, others that we're continuing to work on, and then there's always a few things take longer than we expect that we're not able to get to. So the first 6 items on here, I should say, are all listed under mandatory. These are things that are required typically by the state under growth management or sometimes other legislative action. So the first one being the critical areas updates. As you recall, we needed to do this. This started a few years ago, I think back in 17, if I remember correctly, Dave, that the direction came from the state to update our critical areas. And we got a start on that. We made some changes to it. And then when we were getting to the point of final adoption, there were some questions raised about increasing wetland buffers and what would be required for that. Looking to update our best available science, which would be the basis for establishing those buffers, as well as getting a sense of if we increase the buffers, how would that affect our overall buildable lands capacity? So we took a pause. We had a consultant do some analysis on this, and you're currently getting those reports now. You're getting that information from the consultant, from Shannon and Wilson, on the critical areas, and we're looking at the next steps on that and looking at a public hearing to finalize the amendments to the critical areas ordinance come January. So that one is underway, and it's quite a ways along. I suspect we will have that wrapped up in the first quarter of 21. Comprehensive plan amendments, these tend to change from year to year. We have 2 elements of the comprehensive plan that are new additions that we're looking at, or updates, I should say. One being the in the transportation element, adding the bike plan. You received a presentation on that just about a month or so ago from Sherman Gong with the Public Works Department, who's working on that. So when that is adopted, we will need to incorporate that into the comprehensive plan as part of the transportation element. So that's not exactly a housekeeping, but more of an administrative function at that point. Likewise, on item D under number 2, the Parks and Recreation Open Space element, the plan was adopted earlier this year, I believe. And we will need to integrate that into the comprehensive plan as well. So that's one we were not able to get started on this year as we had hoped to. Two things that we did complete, there were some housekeeping amendments we needed to do to update our annual amendment provisions to be consistent with the Growth Management Act. And then the Canyon Park sub-area plan that gets incorporated into the comprehensive plan. And that was adopted last night. So that becomes part of the comprehensive plan as part of that adoption. So we've got 2 of the 4 out of the way on that one, and the other had been deferred. And I'll get to those a little bit later as well. You heard a report tonight on buildable lands and growth targets, and to a certain extent, the countywide planning policies. They all work together, and those are all underway. We're somewhat at the mercy of the counties in terms of their schedule. So we're continuing to work on that. And I expect that those will be wrapped up. Even the countywide planning policies, for the most part, may overlap a little bit into 22, but those should all be done in 21. And then the reduced parking, which we've spent some time with commission on, and Dave brought that through the commission and also through council. So that one is complete as well. Then under supporting council goals, these are goals that the council's had in place now for a few years, and there are really 2 that we focused on. One being the Canyon Park sub-area and the Regional Growth Center designation. That one's complete, as I said. Big plus there. We'll have a lot more to say about that a little later. And then the housing strategy that the council adopted in 2018. So there are some code amendments there related to Canyon Park that were incorporated into the plan. The accessory dwelling unit code amendments that we're continuing to work on. We've completed several subtasks to that over the last couple of years. And Dave and I have been talking about what we need to do to sort of go to the next level with that for the next docket. And then C, likewise, the multifamily tax exemption program. That one's underway. We should have that one wrapped up in the first or second quarter of 2021 as well. 2 others that we were not able to get started on. One is revising the regulations for micro apartments, and the other having to do with cottage housing. And I believe the cottage housing, at least I think, was added by the Planning Commission last year. And that's one that is still on our docket and will carry forward. You'll see that in the 21 as well. Numerous code amendments, the short plat and the duplexes A and B. Heard about those this evening. Those are well underway. The third one was deferred in terms of the consistency on the residential care facility regulations. We'll keep that on the docket. D and E we were not able to get to. We had hoped to do some of that through the Canyon Park. There was a little bit of investigation done on that as far as what Snohomish County has available, but we didn't get as far as we had hoped. So we'll keep that one as well. Likewise with E and incentivizing, that is another one I think that came from the Planning Commission last year that we added to the docket, that the council agreed to add to the docket as well. So the housekeeping amendments, we knew we were not going to get to those for the most part. There's really only the one that was critical, and that was the first one regarding the SEPA rules that was adopted this year. So that one is passed. And then 9 is underway, and that I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, I think that one has to do with some of the things that you heard this evening as well. So then on item 10, which of course is split between 2 pages, the downtown sub-area code amendments, and these are ones that Dave was working on this year and brought through the commission and to completion with the council. The first being the public space regulations. Happy to say those were finally adopted. We got that on the books. Good work from Dave and persevering and getting all of that through. The second had to do with the downtown historic resources regulations, changes to the guidelines, as well as the regulations for downtown. And related to that were the Title 22 amendments regarding the Landmark Preservation Board and designation procedures. Both of those were adopted back in July. And again, those two had been in the works for a while. And then the others on that C and D really deferred. Other downtown code amendments related primarily to Parcel A to facilitate the development of the affordable housing project there. That had to do a lot to do with the parking and the height. And again, those were ones that were completed this year. The rest were all optional that the council deferred either to for consideration in a subsequent year. So those will still be on the list that we take to council in 21, except for, I should say, deferred. Let me start over. These are all optional tasks that the council deferred last year and may defer again this year. Everything will remain on the list. Some of these may get done in 21 if the council decides to prioritize them, or later on they'll just continue to defer. Ones that we specifically deferred to the next update of the comprehensive plan are noted as deferred to 2024. And those are some private amendments that have been submitted over the last few years. And also the Nike Hill plan and code amendments that we talked to the commission about last year. This is work the commission had done a few years ago. It's now reached a point where we would need to revisit that. And again, we recommend and the council agreed to defer that to the major update of the plan in 24. The next part of it is the docket for the Landmark Preservation Board. This is just information. Typically, these do not involve the Planning Commission, but just so you know, showing the work that's underway there and some completion of the landmark nominations work that was done. So I will stop sharing for just a moment, if I can find it out. There it is. To see if there are any questions about anything that's the status of any of those items on this year's docket.
Commissioner Kurd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. Wow, 2020 was a busy year for the planning department. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and with the staffing that you guys do, that's amazing. My comment is about the items listed under council goals. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that the council has actually set any like real concrete goals going forward. And it would be really helpful to have those measurable goals on Planning Commission so that when we're looking through and assessing new ideas, we have an idea of what council's priorities are. And so I'm wondering if that's something that either you can talk to council about, or if you need one of us to make a comment. I think that would be really helpful. I don't know.
So if I could ask for clarification, Commissioner Kurd, I heard a couple of possibilities there, and I'm not sure if I understood exactly which one you were looking for. One would be the council goals, if you want us to share all of those with the Planning Commission, because you're correct, they didn't set any new goals, and I think that we're just sort of continuing to operate under the goals that they had put in place prior to this year. So, and the two that are most relevant to the Community Development Department are the ones that I mentioned there. Or are you asking for the council to set some goals for the Planning Commission?
Good question. Good clarification there. I think it would be immediately helpful for Planning Commission to see what the current council goals are and verify with council that those goals are still their priorities.
Okay, and I believe that discussion was held with the council. I'll have a conversation with the city manager to make sure I'm understanding correctly where we are on those goals.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I will definitely follow up on that.
Okay, others? Seeing none, I think we can proceed. Well, Commissioner Kurd's wow on how much came before the department and the commission.
Thank you for that observation. We were pleasantly shocked, I think, at just how much we were able to achieve this year.
Commissioner Alders.
Thank you, Chair. Jenny Alders here. I will just echo that in the middle of a pandemic, everything turned upside down. You still accomplished a lot. I came in kind of in the middle of it and was able to see some of the end process of certain projects that I've been working on for a long time. And it's nice to see what it looks like from the beginning and be able to enter a new year with you. My question is, I saw a couple of deferred items, and I wonder if you could pull that back up, the last page of the docket, so I can name them correctly, about Native peoples and Bothell then and now. So yeah, second page, there they are at the bottom, and it says from the previous docket. I'm glad to see that this is on the radar of the city and the community development department. I know that there is, especially after this last year, there is specific interest in these areas going forward, making sure that, excuse me, that any history that is told of Bothell is including an inclusive, it's including inclusive and diverse populations of people that we're updating our stories that we tell each other about our city to include Native peoples, but also the immigrant population who lives here and the diversity that exists. So I know that there is specific interest in the community for both of these projects, and I see that they are on defer. And I would like to know what kind of time frame could we set for those, and is it possible to connect community development with some of these organizations and people who are interested in seeing these move forward?
Very good questions, and I appreciate you raising that. So this is from the 2020 docket, so they were deferred from the 2020 docket. When I get to the 21, I think you'll see that we're proposing some initiation, at least, of some additional work in those areas. One program in particular that I know our consultant right now is, in fact, is going to be talking to the Landmark Board next week. So this is partly in their purview, but it's not just their purview. So we're also in the city staff trying to sort out exactly, what the entire effort needs to be and how we coordinate that. But you're absolutely right, and I think that's an important aspect of what we're trying to do here when we do get going on these projects, is to really acknowledge the fact that history did not begin with the first European settlers in this area. There's a lot of history that exists prior to that, and we want to make sure that we're celebrating all of it in context.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll look forward to the next part. Thanks.
And I will jump to that now. So this is, and you'll notice that we don't have any estimated hours. This is our initial run at the 2021 docket that we'll be presenting to the City Council, and we're scheduled currently to go to Council with this on February 21st. So we will, February 2nd of 2021. I don't know where that came from. So we still have a few mandates, and those are the first 5 items there. You'll notice 3, 4, and 5 are really just a continuation of what we've been doing on the buildable lands and growth targets and countywide planning policies. Number 2, again, some repeats there, the transportation element, the parks and recreation, open space, and we have some ideas of how we might integrate those that would simplify the process a little bit. We're going to see if we can achieve that in 21 if possible, particularly in the parks. And then the private amendments, we're still suggesting those will be deferred to 24. The critical areas is still on there, as I mentioned when we talked about the current docket. We anticipate those wrapping up probably in the first quarter or second quarter at the latest. So many of those will come off, and others will hopefully get wrapped up in 21. Certainly 3, 4, and 5 will get wrapped up for the most part, if not totally, in 21. Then again, continuing with the council goals as we understand them at this point, the housing strategy implementation, which, and I will add to the previous discussion that Commissioner Kerr brought up regarding council goals, they still have priorities, and we know that the housing strategy is still a key priority for them, particularly affordable housing. So that's one reason this continues to be a focus of our docket. And if that changes, the council will tell us that when we present the docket to them. So again, several things that are repeated here: the multifamily tax exemption, continued implementation of the housing strategy, particularly regarding accessory dwelling units. And this is what I alluded to a few minutes ago that Dave and I have been talking about, and how we sort of bring this to the next level in terms of facilitating more development of accessory dwelling units. And we think we can get started at least on the cottage housing and the micro apartment amendment. So that's, again, adding a couple more housing types. Excuse me, that's not exactly missing middle, but it's also still expanding the range of housing types that we would allow and encourage in the city. Canyon Park, the plan was adopted, the regulations were adopted, the planned action ordinance were all adopted last evening. As you recall from our discussions on that, there were several items that were deferred that we still need to work on. So this list reflects those items, as well as some others that may come up as we go through this. The multifamily tax exemption, which would apply based on what we do up above citywide. We also have to get certification of the plan from the Puget Sound Regional Council, and there is a process involved in that. So we would be pursuing that in 21. The bonus incentive system that we included in the regulations, but we didn't put the incentives in there yet. We haven't tied those to what the bonus would be and what the requirement would be to achieve the bonus. Likewise, the commercial linkage fee, again, it's in the code. We're still working on what that fee should be. What's the appropriate amount to make sure that we're helping to facilitate or fund more affordable housing in that area, without making it so onerous that we discourage development of commercial projects. The transfer of development rights is really going to be up to Sound Transit in terms of how quickly that moves forward, but we think that we will at least get that started in 2021 to do the feasibility study, and if it proves to be feasible, which we expect it will, then we would go the next step and start the implementation program. One of the other items that came up in the discussions with the Canyon Park Business Center Association was a potential deferral of some improvements, like through block connections, for example. And that's something that we said we would explore more as we moved into the next phase of this. So we'll put that on the docket as well to look into as part of the Canyon Park implementation. And then this is more of a procedural matter. Right now, we have street standards in the development regulations for Canyon Park. All of our other street standards for the city are in the design and construction manual that Public Works updates every year. So what we expect to do in that next update in 21 is to move those out of the code and into the design and construction manual. And then, as you also recall, the Transportation Demand Management Program is a key part of the Canyon Park sub-area plan in terms of addressing transportation needs in that area. And Public Works will really be the lead on that, but we'll be working with them to help implement that over the course of the next couple of years. So the next area is really in code amendments, and you'll see, again, a lot of repeats in here and some that are wrapping up, like the first two. The parking reductions that Dave mentioned earlier, one piece of that we deferred was the market rate housing, and before expanding that to the half mile to see if we could use that to leverage some more affordable housing. So we hope to complete that piece of the work. Title 12, we're still continuing to defer. We just don't see that as a high priority as some of the other items that we have, but we don't want to lose sight of it, so we keep it on the list. Again, the TDR is looking at what exists in King and Snohomish counties and how we might piggyback on those. And this is outside of what we're talking about for Sound Transit and essential public facilities in Canyon Park, as well as the incentivizing green building, solar power, and those types of things. Some of that gets incorporated into our other codes, like the energy code, part of the building code, for example. There are improvements to that and changes to that we're going to be incorporating when we adopt the building code for 2018 building code that we'll be adopting before February 1st. But we'll look at other things that we can do to help incentivize that. And again, a lengthy list of housekeeping amendments. And this is one where we really need to spend some time with Public Works and some of our other planners and current planning to get a better handle on what's working, what's not, and what are some of the priorities there. So for now, we're just carrying forward the ones we had from the previous year. And there's a couple more on there as well. Downtown code amendments, not seeing as many this year. Really the one that we're anticipating addressing is the 3-story overlay for the general downtown corridor zone. And this is the area up along Beardsley. And this is based on a private request that we've received. And it's a micro apartment housing developer that's interested in that. So we're likely recommending to the council that that we put that on the docket for 21. B has been on the docket for a while, but we've deferred. We've not been able to get funding to do the next phase of the parking study for the downtown. The North Shore School District, we have been awaiting their request, their formal request, to change how the fee is collected. So the city has to adopt the fee every year in order to impose a school impact fee. And this year, the council did that again earlier this month. The fee actually went down this year for both single family and multifamily. But currently, the arrangement we have with the school district is that the fee is collected by them. They provide a receipt to the applicant. The applicant brings that back to the city and as proof that they have paid the fee, and then we can give them their permit. Most other jurisdictions, the fee is collected by the city as part of our permit review process, because as we're taking in the applications and the other fees. So this is a request to have the city collect those fees as well as adopt them and impose them. And there would likely be an administrative fee for the city to do that. This is not something that will come through the Planning Commission. Most of these other things that we're talking about will come through the Planning Commission. That one would not. That really falls under financial titles. There have been a couple of things that have come up in the last year regarding the Shoreline Master Program. One had to do with the changes that were made in floodplains, the regulations and definitions of floodplains that FEMA required us to adopt back earlier this year in the early summer months, as I recall. So that's B under here. We want to make sure that we do that. There were some changes that we need to make that we didn't do in the Shoreline Master Program portion of it because that requires convening the Shorelines Board, and there's a lot more work involved in that. And we felt we just put that off until 21, and we can bring a couple of things to them, the other being the buffer enhancement incentives. This is an item that was brought to the council last year that they added to the docket, but deferred until a future date. The updating of the planned action EIS for downtown. We are getting close to capacity on the residential side, not on the commercial side, as I recall. And again, if you think about what we did for Canyon Park, the planned action EIS there has some thresholds. There's so much capacity that we have planned for, and that's already accounted for in the environmental review under the EIS. Once we exceed that, we either have to update that EIS or the project would have to do its own environmental review. So we're approaching that on the downtown with residential in particular, and this is an item that was not funded in the budget for 21. So we'll continue to defer that. And the rest of these are really items that have come up at various points, sometimes from staff, sometimes from other issues that have arisen, like 14, for example, having to do with the sign code. That's based on a U.S. Supreme Court decision that came down several years ago. It creates some challenges for us. We would like to do this, but it typically ends up being a lower priority in terms of the resources we have available to do the work. Likewise, the landscape regulations, that's one we'd like to do. Adult entertainment came up in the context of the Bikini Barista espresso stands that were opened a few years ago. It has become less of an issue, but it's still on the docket unless and until the council takes that off. And this is another one that was added by the council a few years ago, but again, has not become a high priority. And that's number 17, which is there was a project a few years ago. This is out at Beardsley Crossing, where there was some property that ended up being dedicated to the city as parkland, and the council has to accept that. They hadn't received, they hadn't had a chance to really consider whether they wanted that at that point. It had already been built into the project, so they didn't feel they had a choice except to accept it. And this is something they want to try to rectify that through the code. And then these are the private amendments under 18, and then 19 is the Nike Hill one that I also talked about in the last docket. So just very quickly, and again, this is under the purview of the Landmark Preservation Board. In addition to the Native Peoples Project, there's also, this is, I think, a federal program, and we're submitting a proposal to get some funding for this, but it's called Telling Bothell's Full Story, and it's Tell the Full Story is the federal program. I don't know a lot about it. I can bring you more information, but I think this would help to kick off some of the things that we've talked about in terms of history projects and recognizing histories of different cultures and peoples that have been in the area that haven't always been included as part of the history that we've talked about. So at this point, we don't know the status of those. We have very limited resources in terms of our consultant. We have 10 hours a week that we have our consultant for. That gets increased if we have grant monies to help pay for additional hours. We don't know yet if we have those. So we'll take this to council and we'll see what priorities they would like to set for that. So that is what I have this evening. If there are other questions or clarifications or things that the commission would like to talk about as far as adding, subtracting, or priorities you would like to see conveyed to the council.
Is this my cue to bring up the addition of the opportunity to start the process for adding our downtown as a countywide center?
Yes,
this just came up in the last couple of days.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, it is. I asked Dave to remind me if I forgot to tell you about something, and you did your job very well. Thank you, Dave. So I received a letter just this week from the director for King County. I forget the full title, their policy strategy division. It's their long-range planning group, basically, their strategic planning. So we knew that this was coming, but we didn't know it was coming as quickly as it is. As part of the update to the framework policies for regional growth centers that was done at the Puget Sound Regional Council a couple of years ago, one of the things that was added to that was a provision that provided some consistency among the 4 counties to designate what they were calling countywide centers. So they're not a regional growth center, but it's recognizing, and this was already occurring in some counties, but not in King County, recognizing certain areas as an important center, a growth center, if you will, but having more importance at the countywide level versus a regional level. These could be countywide centers that would ultimately grow into regional growth centers, or they may stay as more, relevant at just the countywide level. So it's not a requirement that it would go to a regional growth center status, but that would be one possible route. And it would go through a county process for approval, subject to some initial criteria set by Puget Sound Regional Council. All of that to say, we knew that was coming, but we didn't think it would be anything that we would need to do until it was put into the countywide planning policies, which won't be adopted until late 21 or early 22. However, the letter this week noted that because of the funding cycle for transportation projects at Puget Sound Regional Council, that would come earlier than when we would have these in place, which would be our 24 update. I'm sorry, I'm over-explaining this. The long and the short of it is, if we want downtown to be a countywide center, which is what we have thought about doing, and we've talked about this in staff, and ultimately maybe even a regional growth center, we need to do something this year, not the full-blown application process, but at least to put it in as a candidate countywide center. And there will be some work involved in doing that. So we will add that to the docket for council consideration and recommend it as a priority to get that done. I think the deadline is August to submit that for approval. So thank you, Dave, for that reminder, and my apologies for that overly lengthy explanation.
Commissioner Curd, and then Commissioner Clark.
Thanks, Chair. This is Karsten. My question is about item 12 on the proposed docket, the EIS update to downtown. We're proposing a lot of new, or I guess there's a lot of new proposals for housing downtown. Lot D just sold. I'm trying to gauge our concern level. Are we like 98% capacity? This is urgent, or do you think that there's a little bit of wiggle room and space to leave this on defer?
So thank you for the question. I think there are a couple of ways to look at this. One is in terms of how close are we to the capacity. And we haven't run the exact numbers, but I think the general sense is that we're probably fine as far as Block D and maybe a couple of other projects. We're not seeing the same number of large projects like we've had over the last few years. So it filled up very quickly. The other way to look at it is that was also intended to be an incentive to encourage the type of development that we wanted to see in the downtown. So it could be that the council makes a policy decision that it's achieved its goal and we don't necessarily need to update the EIS, that we'll just let development continue and it will have to do its own environmental review. So a couple of different ways to look at that. We are going to run out of capacity though, probably if not in 21, probably in 22, just based on some of the projects that we know could be coming in the door a little bit later on. Dave, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, yeah, I would say that we're not at 95 or 98%. I don't have a precise number, but I think we've got a little ways to go. And as Mike said, when we hit the threshold, it doesn't mean we impose a moratorium on development. It just means that they have to go through their own review process.
Other comments? Who did I forget? Works.
Thank you, Chair. Jenny Aldrichs here. Thank you for the overview of what we might get to over the next year. I think you have a pretty good sense of one, both how to prioritize things, but also what's reasonable to get to. And so if I were to offer some opinions to steer that in any way, I would really urge the city.
Oops, you froze after urge the city. Oh. I lost Commissioner Aldrichs.
I can certainly carry the message to the commission, to the council, that the commission would like to urge the city. Hopefully we'll get her back soon.
Yeah, Commissioner Olson, do you want to say something while we wait? Mr. Aldrichs' connection reestablishes.
Sure. I kind of had a question. So if there's something that just I personally am interested in exploring or seeing on the docket, is that something I would go to council with like a public comment, or would I tell you now? I guess I'm not.
So when we say something is coming from the commission, we like to say it's coming, there's a consensus on the commission.
Gotcha.
So it wouldn't be an individual request. You can make an individual request here and see if there's support on the commission to include that as a suggestion from the full commission.
Okay. Yeah. I don't just listen to me. I mean, everything would be Harry Potter themed in Bothell. So I am curious, because this came up from a few commissioners when we were talking about duplexes and triplexes. Is anyone else interested in floating the idea of sort of not just corner lots for duplexes and triplexes? I think, like, just thinking about my neighborhood, there's a lot of lots that straddle two roads where it makes sense to do a duplex. You know, you could be on totally different roads and just have a shared wall. But I guess I'm just curious if there are more opportunities that we could look at if everyone here is interested and if the council is interested, you know, with all those caveats. So.
Not seeing any. Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. I maybe piggybacking off of that would be interested in other types of missing middle. So like triplexes and fourplexes rather than just duplexes. Citywide, allowing duplexes is certainly right up my alley too, but I don't know if that's something that council would be really ready to discuss, but perhaps it might be easier to talk about other forms of missing middle housing that could make a substantial change as well in our affordable housing issue.
And Dave, if I recall correctly, I think there's something in the strategy about looking at that specifically, the missing middle and the duplex, triplex, fourplex. I don't know if it's a tier 1 or a tier 2 or 3.
Yeah, I don't recall off the top of my head either, and I don't recall if we used the term missing middle. Wasn't quite as in vogue when we did housing strategy, but there is language in there to encourage alternative housing types. So.
I wanted to note, just for the record, that after her connection became unstable, I'm seeing Jenny had to restart her computer. So perhaps Commissioner Aldrich will be back shortly. Question, and I'm not sure if it's a docket item or just presentation, but you did talk about the group from Bothell doing some diversity work and coming back to us. Would that be on the schedule somewhere?
Yes, that wouldn't be part of the docket, but that would be, we put that on the schedule. And thank you for reminding me, I was going to bring that up in the staff report as well. I did get their presentation. I attended their presentation last week and reiterated an invitation to come to the Planning Commission and present, and they're certainly interested in that. We'll see if we can work out a date for that. They're still working on their final projects and products and looking ahead to vacation, I think.
Okay, good, thank you. So other comments, questions? Dragging a little bit to see if Commissioner Aldrich can get back, but perhaps we should move, and if she wants, Commissioner Olson.
Should we do just a quick hand raise on the duplex, triplex, missing middle? I mean, I'd love to see what other things we can come up with. I picked duplexes and triplexes because we've kind of already broached the subject, but cottage houses sound adorable and super helpful because there's not a lot of small houses in Bothell for people to move to as they need that in their lives. But anyway.
So interest, let's see, 1, 2, 3. I don't see Commissioner Aldrich back. I think there's an interest in looking forward on that. So you want to bring?
Okay. And I mentioned the housing strategy and the fact that it's in there. I think we can use that just to raise it and see if they want to make it a higher priority. But certainly note that it's already in the strategy.
Okay.
So we can add that to the docket. Maybe put it in the context of the cottage housing and broaden that to include more a range of more housing types specifically targeted toward the missing middle. We can rewrite that one.
All right, good, thank you. Well, I feel a little bad moving forward because Commissioner Aldrich was mid-comment on this item, but if she does re-enter, I'll come back to her. I do think we should move a little bit forward at this point. The next item would be old business. And so should we talk about the council meeting here?
That would be fine, Mr. Chair. I'll defer to you to start
Sure.
that.
Well, last night the council did hear the Canyon Park item. There were 3 items that we discussed. The planning commission discussed preceding my tenure on the commission. Lots of meetings. It was gratifying to hear the council. First, I guess I'll cut to the chase. They approved all 3 items unanimously. They spoke very highly of the work that came out of the commission. Clearly, a number of council members have been following the work of the commission, and very specific notes. Deputy Mayor Zorn specifically thanked the commission for work we did on this. So I think it's something we can all be proud of having a hand in, and look forward to watching this go forward. Anything to that?
Yeah, I think you captured the best part of it, that it was unanimous. The council was very appreciative and very complimentary of the work of the commission, and wanted that conveyed. They had I thought they had a few good questions, but they pretty much understood what the vision was, the work that the commission had done in developing the draft plan and the regulations, recognizing there's still some more work to do. And they heard a lot of comments last night from business park owners. A lot of the same comments that the commission has heard, concerns about traffic, and feeling that the traffic issues had not been addressed. I think the council looked at the work that had been done and understood that we have addressed the traffic to the degree that it can be addressed, and if the solution is not more roads. We made a point of saying that the commission identified early on that transit was a priority, and that came through, and I think they were supportive of that. So,
they were definitely supportive of the move away from total reliance on single occupancy vehicles. So that was gratifying. So, Commissioner Alderks, you're back. You cut out mid comment on saying something to council. We did move to old business, but I welcome you completing the comment you wanted to make.
Thank you, Chair. Jenny Alderks, I have returned. I had to completely restart the computer because everything froze on me. It was about the docket. So I don't know at what point I cut off, but there was a thank you for preparing a plan for next year, and I hope that we can get to even most of it. And a request to prioritize the history piece. And I'm not sure how much Planning Commission has in that, but I do know that for this moment in history, what this generation is facing, I would like to very much see that being prioritized next year. And my question was, you had mentioned about 10 hours with a consultant, and I wanted to clarify which consultant would we have to work on that project with?
we have a consultant under contract, Sarah Desimone, she's officed at City Hall when we're at City Hall, and when we get back to City Hall. So she essentially functions as a supplement to staff, if you will, and her primary responsibility is to staff the Landmark Preservation Board. So we contract with her for 10 hours a week on average for the year, and a lot of that goes towards staffing the Landmark Board and the work that they do. So they receive applications for designation. They review projects that, if they are on the register or eligible for the register and they're proposed for demolition, then they go to the Landmark Board. Certain areas of the downtown, any new buildings that are built, go to the Landmark Board for review as well in terms of the design. So they have several tasks that they undertake during the year, and they meet once a month. So a lot of her time is taken up with staffing the board. And then there are additional projects that show up on that docket, like the history projects, for example, that she seeks grants in order to pay for additional hours for her to work on those. So that really tends to dictate how much of that work can be done. But she's been a consultant with the city now for how many years, Dave?
Oh, must be 6 or 7, I think.
Okay. So she's been with the city a while.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I think when I was first onboarded with orientation, I was introduced to her, and so I'm familiar with her scope. I am also wondering then if that's a role that landmark preservation is doing in terms of knowing Bothell's history and including Native peoples in it. Would that also be something that the to be hired diversity and equity and inclusion director might have some contributions to?
Again, a good question. I don't think we know the answer to that yet. My expectation would be that at the very least there would be coordination with that. And that's something I know that Sarah, our consultant, has been coordinating with Becky Range, the assistant to the city manager, who's working on some of the diversity tasks for the city. So there is definitely coordination there, and I would expect it's not all going to reside with the Landmark Preservation Board. It's gonna come up in other areas as well.
And then one final question on that is, what is our role as a planning commission in that process?
In which process?
In bringing the history. It's on our docket as Native peoples and Bothell then and now, and like tell the full story. What is the planning commission's role in those projects?
So that docket is for the Landmark Preservation Board. We share that with the council because it's work that CD is the community development is doing. So we want to make sure the council is aware of that and the priority. Most of the time there is no overlap between what the Planning Commission does and what the Landmark Preservation Board does. I think one of the recent examples was Title 22. That came to the planning. We had a joint session with the Planning Commission and the Preservation Board. But typically there's the two areas of responsibility are fairly distinct.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Now, having said that, you asked that we convey that history piece be prioritized, and part of the discussion we had while you were gone was a suggestion by Commissioner Olson to focus more on some missing middle housing. And as I explained, if it's something that the commission wants to convey, there needs to be some consensus from the commission that we will carry forward. Otherwise, it can be an individual comment that would come from a commissioner as a private citizen.
Since I'm catching up still, were you able to have a conversation on that? And would you like me to weigh in, or?
Well, we did get a consensus on the missing middle. I guess what I'm suggesting is if this is something the commission wants to send forward as a comment about prioritizing the history project, that would need to come from a consensus of the commission to do that.
Chair, go ahead, Chair.
So I'll ask, is there a consensus on moving that to a higher priority? I see Commissioner Gustafson, yes. Commissioner Alberts, I see yes. So I don't see a strong consensus there.
Okay. Well, as I said, certainly as individuals, you can convey those feelings to the city council. And I don't know if you were on the line at the time, Commissioner Alberts. We're anticipating we're taking this to the council on February 2nd for a study session. They don't take formal action on this. We really just look for more of again, some head nods and say, yes, this is what we want you to work on this year.
Okay.
And
right,
just one other quick thing while we're still on the docket. One thing I forgot to mention. Several of you talked at the beginning about how much had been done this year. I want you to recognize that is the commission's work as well. So you have accomplished a lot this year. And I don't want to lose sight of that. I don't want you to lose sight of that, because most of what we do in the docket involves the Planning Commission to a large degree. And you do a lot of the heavy lifting for the council. So I think it's important to recognize that and to tell you how much, as staff, we appreciate your work as well. So congratulations on all of your achievements this year too.
Commissioner Olson.
I was just going to give a quick shout out to Commissioner Pystrup and Vice Chair Kurd and Chair Kiernan, because they've all been on the commission longer than when the other three of us started, and have worked on Canyon Park since 2020 was about 30 years long, for about 31 years. So good job, guys. I'm sure it's glad to see it, get to the next stage.
Commissioner Kurd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. I also want to shout out to the consultants that were hired. Some of the presentations that they gave were so informative, and the way that they were laying out information and taking our inane questions and emails and stuff. Oh, it was so helpful. So really hats off to community development and management at the city for hiring really good consultants and vetting them really well.
And I'd like to be sure to recognize the past commissioners, and I won't try to name them all other than Commissioner Vliet, who most recently left. But there were a number, this has gone on long enough that there are a number of commissioners who have voiced some very strong opinions and helped lead through this. So appreciate their work as well. And staff, you guys did a great job between the COVID situation and losing your senior planner who saw so much of this, bringing it to conclusion. High praise from the council is really an accomplishment. So recognize that.
Well, thank you all for that. And I had mentioned this before we started the meeting tonight. I don't think everybody was there at the time. I did call Bruce Blackburn after the council meeting last night to congratulate him and also thank him for all of his extraordinary work on this. And I also gave kudos last night to the staff. And I want to pick out Dave in particular, because he picked up some of the work on this as well when he already had a full plate. So very much appreciated. It was a major effort by a lot of people. And I agree with Commissioner Kurd. We had a really good consultant team as well. I think we had one of the best teams I've worked with. And I've worked with some of them before, so I did have some personal knowledge of them too. In fact, I hired one of them when I worked in another city, so as a staff person. So I think we were on old business, Mr. Chair, and
yes, we were.
I had nothing else to add as far as a Canyon Park, other than I would encourage commissioners, if you weren't watching last night, if you haven't had a chance, I think it's worth watching the discussion of the council before the vote.
All right, so moving on from old business, any reports from staff?
Oh, it's the end of the year. We've covered some of them. I have a long list. I'll try to move through them quickly. So I mentioned last time that we had selected a new planner, the senior planner for Bruce's old position. We have finalized all the paperwork finally, and we're just nailing down a start date. So he's given notice, and we'll be moving out here at the end of the year, first of next year. So I anticipate he'll be starting sometime before the 20th, and I will have him here on the 20th of January at your meeting to introduce him to you. I'm very excited about him starting. Commissioner Aldrichs asked somewhat forlornly about when we're moving to Zoom. I think we're all a little tired of dealing with WebEx. So I had hoped to do that for the January 20th meeting. Unfortunately, we're still in the process of acquiring the license, and we didn't have the information that we needed to send out the Imagine Bothell notice this month, which has to go out before the end of the month. So we're going to be stuck with this for at least one more meeting, and then I hope to have everything in place so we can switch over at the February meeting to Zoom. And of course, then I'll have to learn how to work that. Let's see what else. Tomorrow night there is a meeting. This is the North, and I'm sorry, Dave, remind me again what this is.
It's the lower Lower North Creek Subbasin master plan.
Okay.
And
And this is one I think Commissioner Gustafson asked me to forward to the commission, and I believe that we've gotten some word from the organizers of that we have several planning commissioners and other board members possibly attending. So we have to post the potential quorum when those situations arise. We've talked about this before in other meetings, and we were not able to do that today. We just ran out of time to do that. So I have to ask that the commissioners limit yourselves to no more than 3 of you attending that, and you can figure out who that is. And this has come up a few times now, and what I would suggest is, I think it's great that you're all involved and that you want to attend these and get information. What I would suggest for your consideration in the future is maybe select 2 or no more than 3 to attend some of these where you all have a similar interest, and then have a report back to the commission at the next meeting about what information you learned at those workshops. And we have a place on the agenda for planning commissioners to report. So I think that would be an appropriate time and place to do that. So just a suggestion, but again, for tomorrow night, please limit yourselves, and I trust all of you to do that.
So my recollection is we did have 2 members who expressed a specific interest in that. Is that correct? I see Commissioner Curd and Commissioner Gustafson, you're both interested. So if there is one additional commissioner that would be acceptable within the Open Public Meetings Act. Otherwise, we'll just go with those 2 and look forward to your report. So seeing no other interest, I'll expect it's just those 2. And Carmen, you can be assured we're compliant with the law here.
I will sleep better tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application period for vacancies on the boards and commissions will be opening up in January, sometime early January, I think after the first of the year. The city clerk's office runs that process. They're going to get the word out, and our communications staff are also going to make sure that they get the word out as extensively as possible to really encourage a diversity of applicants for those vacancies. So we did advertise this earlier this fall when we thought we were going to be wrapping up Canyon Park, and Commissioner Vliet would be stepping down earlier than what ended up being. So anyone who applied during that process, I think that those applications are still going to be considered in this next round. So if you had anyone that you know of that applied, they're still good, or anyone else who is interested, they can still have the option to apply after the first of the year. And typically the council will do interviews sometime in February and make the appointments in early March. And then the new commissioner would take the seat in, well, actually that case, it's a partial term. It would take place immediately after appointment, similar to what happened with Commissioner Olson earlier this year. If it's a new term, then they take office April 1st. So we've got the January 20th meeting. We'll come back with what we're proposing at that point as our recommended docket to the council for your information and any last minute comments. Also 2 public hearings that evening, as Dave was talking about earlier, on the items that you had earlier, the housing items you had earlier tonight, as well as the critical areas. So those will be coming back for public hearing and possible action that evening. And then finally, I just want to let you know that staff will be taking some time off for the end of the year. Dave is going to be out the last 2 weeks of the year, and I'm going to be out the last 2 weeks of the year and the first week of January. So we will not be available, but we look forward to coming back to meet with you in January. And on behalf of the staff, we just want to thank you for all of your work and all of your support and all of your great input this year, and wish you all the very happiest of holidays, and hope you all get a chance to relax and take some time with yourself and your loved ones as well. So thank you for that. And that's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank Thank you, Dr. Cotterman. Reports from members, final year-end reports. I'll say Commissioner Alders.
Just by way of update, I announced, who knows, 30 years ago, that I started taking some classes at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I will now say that I have completed 4 of them of the six class series. So had some good learning, used some examples from City of Bothell in my assignments, and just really enjoyed that process. So thought I would share.
Congratulations. Other from members? Commissioner Gustafson.
If anyone is a glutton for public hearings, there will be another one on Friday. I just want to make sure no one else is going to that. It's at the 522-405 Interchange WashDOT project.
Commissioner Olson.
I'm kind of tentative on that one. I might let work take precedent if it has to, but I'm very interested. So count both of us in.
Okay. So, question, Director Common, is if a member, I'll use the word audits a meeting but doesn't participate in it, would that be covered under the Open Public Meetings Act?
I believe so. I think it's just the fact that there are that many, that number of members are all present in the same place. And it's really to avoid any appearance or opportunity for conducting business outside of the public meeting.
Well, good reminder. All right. So seeing no further business, I guess I'll make some final comments. Reflecting back on the docket, we did get a lot done. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you on that. I look forward to more productive meetings next year, helping really steer the direction of the city. So it's good work that's done here, and I'll be proud of it. I'll echo Director Cotterman's hope that you all have a healthy and happy holiday season. Spend some time as you best wish to spend it. And with that, if there's a motion to adjourn the meeting, Commissioner Olson.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second? Commissioner Alders.
I will second that motion.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in, you gotta ask. All in favor of adjourning? All right. There being no further business, and the motion passes to adjourn the meeting at 8:53. Y'all have a great holiday, a happy new year, and see you next year.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays. Goodbye.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Have a good holiday.